All right, so um, welcome back to another class, and today we are going to be getting into CSS, as you can see from my screen. Introduction to CSS, because we talked about some of the HTML that we need, not all of them. But the major one that we need or that we're going to be using day in, day out there later on, we've talked about them. And again, other one are going to be added in this CSS as we keep progressing there. So the CSS is what we can use to style the content that we have on our page. Because some of the elements we have been generating since, they are not going to look like the way we want them to be. But how do we make our elements to look like the way we want them to be on the page? We can style them. For example, my button, I don't want it to have the dummy background that is there, or the text, the way the text is inside that button is not giving the color that I want. So with the CSS, we can change the style for our element there. What is going on? Why is this thing loading? All right, so yeah, so the stuff is back. So CSS make it possible for us to style our elements the way we want them to look like on the page. And in order for you to be able to do all these things, there's some stuff that you need to know. And we're going to be starting with how we can include CSS on our page, because you need to know how you can add or include CSS inside your HTML file. So you have your HTML file, or you have the page that you want to work on. Then after you've done with the content that you want to show to the user, the next thing is for you to style them to look like the way you want it to be, just like this website here, which is this Remitter. So they have this their login page where you can log in into their system. But some of the elements they are using on this page is what we've talked about, but we don't know how to style them the way it is on this page. Like this button now, look at the way it's behaving when I move on top of the button and when I'm not on top of the button. Again, for this submit too, it's changing the color. And as you can see, the links that we have on this page, the color is quite different from the other text that we have on the screen. So how do we to do something like this? How do we change the color? How do we change the size of our element and so forth like that? CSS is what you are going to use to achieve that. And in order for you to do that, you need to know how to include CSS on our page. And we have these three methods that you can use to include CSS on a page. So we have the inline CSS, which is something that you're going to be doing inside your HTML. We have this internal CSS. This one too, you are going to be doing it inside HTML. But for this third one, it is external. You are going to have a CSS in its own separate file, and you can now connect it to the HTML file. But for the first two that we have on this list, you are creating CSS inside the HTML file. And don't forget, when we are talking about HTML that time, we talked about attributes, which is what you can use to add extra information to your tag. So you can use attributes to add extra information to the tag. And for this inline CSS, we have an attribute that we can use to apply CSS on our element. And that attribute is what we call inline CSS. So for example here now, this is my H1, I can give it this attribute style here. And this attribute style, whatever I'm doing here now, is what we call inline CSS. So inline CSS makes it possible for us to apply CSS directly inside HTML by giving any element this attribute style. Once you give any element this attribute style, whatever you are doing inside it is going to be all about CSS. And the entire stuff that you have here is what we call inline CSS. But what are you going to be putting inside this code is whatever the changes that you want to make on the element. For example, here now, I want to change the color of the element to red. What I'm doing here, we're going to explain a lot of them later on when we get to the property part. As you can see, we start talking about them, which is this. As you can see, the color is here. I will explain it better there. But for now, I'm using it, and as you can see, the color of the text has changed to red. By default, the color is set to black, just like the way it is here. But we don't want it to be black. We want it to be a separate color. So we can go to that element, and what can we do there? We can give it this inline CSS. So anytime you are working with your element and you want to apply CSS to it, you can use this inline method to change the styling of the element. What you do is just to go to that your element, give it the attribute style, and inside the code, you are going to be applying all the styles or the changes that you want on the element. So here now, just like the way I did it on line 9, I want to do it again on line 13. So here too, I want to change the color that is there from whatever that used to be there before, which is black. I want to change it to green. And once I go back to the screen after saving the code, you see that all the text that is inside this OL, you see that everything will change to green. Right now it looks like it's black, but it's not. I can change the color to something else that is going to show clearly. For example, blue here. So, and you are going to see on the screen that the text is now blue and is not black again. So with CSS, you can change the style of your element by using any of these methods that we have here. But currently, I'm using this first method, which is known as inline CSS. And in order for you to apply inline CSS, you just go to the element where you want to apply the CSS, and you are going to give it this attribute style here. And inside this attribute, which is inside the code, you apply whatever properties. But what is properties? You are going to see them later on by the time we start talking about CSS property. Because there are different properties that you can change on different elements, like their color, the size, the weight, the background, and so forth like that. When we get to that part, under this CSS property, we are going to talk about all of them. As you can see, there are different properties that you can change on your element. But for now, we are focusing on how we can include CSS on a page. And you can use this inline method, which is what I'm doing right now on line 13. And it's still the same thing I have on this line 9. So this is how you can apply CSS on element. But this one I have drawback. The drawback of it is that whatever stuff you are doing on this element, there is no way it will affect any other element on the page. So that's one of the drawback of the inline CSS. So look at it now. We only apply the stuff on the first H1. You see that the other H1 still maintain whatever that is there before. Since we did not talk to them, they are still going to maintain their normal styling that the browser is applying by default. And this is the reason why we don't normally use this inline like that, because most of the time, the styling that you're applying on this H1 is still the same style you want to apply on this H1 or other H1 or any one of the elements on the screen. You want to apply the changes at once. So if I want this H1 too now to be red, it means everything that I did here on line 9, I have to go to that H1 and apply it again. So now imagine I have like 10 H1 here. I have to do the same thing for all of them one by one. And if there is any changes, I need to go to each one of them to make the changes. But when you are working on a site, there's a lot of elements that you are going to have there, or there's a lot of same element that you want to apply the same style on them, and you want to make changes rapidly on them. Not that you have to start, going to each one of them to make the changes. So we want to do the changes at once and apply to our element. So we can use another method which is known as this internal or this external. And this internal too, sometimes some people will call it embedded here. It's still the same thing. So internal or embedded, they are the same thing. And what does that mean? This one now, what it means is that our style now, we are not going to be applying it on the element using this attribute. We are going to create a separate element, and inside that element, that's where we put all our styling that we want to apply to the elements that we have on the page. So instead of us going to each one of the element one by one to give them this attribute style, we can create elements. We can create the style element, and inside that style element, we apply whatever we want, and we talk to the style that to go to this H1 or go to all the H1 on the screen. I want you to change their text to red. Go to all the OL on the screen. I want you to change the background to blue, and so forth like that. Look at what I'm saying now. I'll be listening to what I'm saying right now. When you are using the inline one, you go to each one of the elements and you apply them line by line. But when you're talking about this embedded, this one allows us to talk to different elements at once. And in order for you to be able to talk to the element at once, there are some stuff you need to know about, which I'm going to get into soon. But before we get there, how do we generate the style element? Because when you are dealing with this internal or embedded, what you'll be doing is to generate the style element instead of you generating attributes. When you are dealing with inline, the style is attributes. But when you are dealing with embedded or external CSS there, then this thing is going to be a separate element on its own. And where do you put that element? We normally put it inside the head. You can put it anywhere on the page, inside the body too, but by convention, we normally put it at the head, which is before the closing tag of the head, like this. And inside this head, you are going to create the style element, not attribute again. As you can see, is that element that is having both the opening and the closing tag. And inside this opening and the closing tag, whatever you'll be doing here is not about HTML again. It's not all about CSS, which is the same thing that we have here. But how do we talk to this style that we want to style this H1 that is here? When you're using inline, you are already on the H1, so it knows that it's supposed to apply it on this H1. When you put it on this OL, when you put the style on OL, it knows that it's supposed to do the changes on this OL. But now, it's not part of any of the element again. It's now standing on its own. So how do we talk to different elements that we now have on our page? That's where something known as a rule set comes in. So in CSS, we have something known as so we have CSS rule set. And this rule set is a combination of the elements. So how do you get the element on the screen, and along with the changes that you want to make on the element. So rule set is what you are going to be using inside this place. But how do we represent rule set? So rule set is a combination of what we call selector, like this. So this is how it's going to be. You have your selector, then here you are going to have curly brace, and inside the curly brace you are going to have declarations like this. So this is how you are going to be working when you are dealing with embedded or external later on, because it's still the same thing. So this embedded and external, they use the same thing. The difference between them is just that you have internal inside your HTML, while the external one is inside its own separate file. But whatever you'll be doing inside this embedded here, it's still the same thing that you're going to be doing inside the external, just that you have a separate file there. So when you are dealing with embedded or internal, inside this style, you are going to have a rule set. So entire stuff here is what we call rule set. So entire stuff that we have here is what we call rule set. And let me give a sample. So H1, no, I don't want to clean all this in. So let me give a sample so that you can see what is going on. Color is red, and let me circle them so that we can compare. So yeah, this is what you will be doing every time. And as you can see, compare it to what we have done here. This is a sample here. This is a sample here. So what does this mean, or what is it doing here? So if you look at it, we have a text before the curly brace, and again we have some other text inside the curly brace. So the one you have before the curly brace, this one that I call selector here, for example, this H1, is what you are going to be using to talk to the CSS that you want to style this particular element on the page. So for example here, I'm saying that CSS or the browser, I'm looking for H1 on the screen. Then anywhere you see H1 inside the body, I want you to change the color to red. So this side is where you are going to be having the element you want to style. So what are you going to be using to style the element? We're going to get into that one too soon. But for now, this is how you will always do it every time you want to target anything inside the body. So when you want to target any element inside the body and you are using this embedded or external CSS, what you do is to create a selector, which is what you use to target the element inside the body. Then inside the curly brace, you put all the CSS properties that you want to change on the element. For example, like this color we have here. But this one now is known as inline CSS because we are applying it directly on the element. So we don't need to talk about the element we want to apply the stuff. It's already on that H1. It knows that it's supposed to change the color of this H1 to red and not else on this page. But when you're using this embedded, you are not just talking to the first H1 or the last H1. You are talking to all the H1 using this method here. But there is a way of talking to each one of them separately too later on. When we get to selector, you know how to do that. But for now, this is how you are going to work with embedded or external CSS. So when you're talking about external CSS or embedded, this one too allows you to apply CSS on the page, but you are not inside any of the element. So, and in order for you to talk to CSS to go to this OL to style it, you are going to use something known as selector, and inside the curly brace, you are going to put the declaration, which are the properties that you want to change, because you can change multiple property on a particular element. For example here, I'm changing the background to red. I'm changing the colors to red, and at the same time, I'm changing the background to green. So it's not just one item, or it's not just one property that you can change. You can change multiple properties on one element at once. I can do it here too. If I want to do it here, I just need to separate them with semicolon here, which is the same thing. As you can see, what I'm doing here is still the same thing as what I'm doing on this line. The difference between them is that this one is inline, while this one is a rule set. So we are using the rule set method here, and here we are using the inline method. So with the rule set method, what do? You mention the element by using selector that you want to style. Then inside the curly brace, you are going to put all the properties that you want to change. This one I'm putting on different line, you can actually put them together too, but it's not that readable. That's why we normally move them to a separate line like this. So it's easier to read when they are on a separate line, because there's a lot of properties you'll be changing on your elements later on. So here I'm just changing 2, or it can be 1, but later on this thing can be up to line like 10 lines, 20 lines, depending on what you are trying to do with that your element. So, and putting them on one line is not that going to be readable, but to the computer is going to interpret it correctly. But to you, you will not be able to read it like that. So it's always good that you move each one of them to a separate line. But if they are on the same line, it will still work. But the major thing here is that we have our rule set. So the entire stuff here is what we call rule set. So the entire stuff I have on this line is what we call rule set. And inside the rule set, we have the selector. So this is what we use to select. And everything inside this curly brace is what we revert to as declaration. So everything here is selector. So whatever you have before it is what we call selector. And you can have multiple of them too that you are going to see later on. And inside the curly brace, we have the declaration like this. So you are going to have declaration because it can be more than one. So let me put S here. And again, to here too, it can be more than one. So we are going to have selectors like this. So we have different selectors that we're going to be talking about later on. But for now, whatever that is going to be here, they are known as selectors. And everything that will be inside the curly brace, they are known as declarations. And inside your declaration, as you can see here, it comes in two parts. So when you are talking about declaration, it comes in two parts, or in these two major parts here. So if you look at it, we have the one before the colon. Let me reduce this line so that it can show clearly. So inside this, before the colon, we have this one, and after the colon, we have another one. The same thing down here too. As you can see, all of them follow the same pattern. So you have something here like this. So what are all these things? We have name for them too. So something in this way, they are known as property name, and the one that you are putting after the colon is known as the property value. So the one you are putting here is what we call the property name. So this is known as property name like this. While the one in front like this, they are referred to as a property value. So what is stuff that you are trying to, you know, the property. I want to change the color. That's the property that you want to change. But what is that color that you are changing to? Are you changing to red? Are you changing to blue? Are you changing to green and so forth like that? Those are what we call value. And this is the pattern all the properties that you are going to be using later on follows. So we have selector, and at the same time we have declaration. But inside the declaration, as you can see, it follows the pattern. When you have a text, after the text you have the colon, then in front of it you have another text. So the text you have before the colon is what is the property that you want to change, the actual property you want to change on that element. And whatever that follows the columns, or whatever that comes after the column, that's the value of the property that you want to change this thing to. Before, the color is black, so I don't want the color to be black, I want it to be red. Again, the background is white, or the background is not even there at all, it's transparent. But right now, I don't want it to be transparent, I want it to have a background of green. But now let's save the code, and let's go back to the page. And once this thing is done loading, can you see what happened? It apply it to all the H1 that we have on the screen. This is the advantage of using embedded or external CSS, because this one now, you can talk to multiple elements at the same time. Not that you have to be going inside each one of them one by one. Look at it. What I'm doing here is that all the H1 on my screen, I'm changing the color to red, and I'm changing the background to green. And if there is any changes, once I do the changes here, you see that it will change for all of them except the first one, because I'm doing the inline for that one. So it will not change that one, and I will explain the reason why it's not changing it later on. But for now, as you can see, all the other one, their stuff has changed. I don't need to be going inside all the H1 one by one to apply the style. I can just do everything at once using my internal or external CSS. But in order for you to do that, you need to create a rule set. And rule set is the combination of selector and the declaration. That means the properties that you want to change on that particular element. It can be one element, it can be multiple elements, depending on the selector you are using here. As you can see, it's selector. But what are the selectors? What is selectors? We are going to get there once we get under this CSS basic selector, because you need to know how to select elements on the page so that you can style them. But for now, this is how to perform the embedded or internal CSS. And if I want, I can just remove that, then change it to H2. You see that it will not apply it again on all our H1. It will not apply it on the H2 on the screen. As you can see, it's not happening to H1 again. And if you scroll down, anywhere we have H2, that's when it's going to apply it. And if I don't want it to be on the H2, what I can just do is to put li like this. So what I'm saying is that anywhere we have li on the page, is going to apply that same thing on them. As you can see, all the li, we have it. I don't need to start going to li one by one. Look at a lot of li on this page. So it would not be good you going to each one of them just to change the background and the color. Now imagine you need to update it later on. You have to go through all of them one by one again. And here now I have a lot of li. So instead of you using the inline method, just like the way we have it here, we can now use the embedded or this internal CSS to talk to different elements at the same time, and that we change their style at once, not that we'll be going inside each one of them one by one. So if I want to change the background now, I can just change the background and you see that it will update everything at once. And if I want, I can apply some other properties that I'm going to be talking about later on. You see what all this thing is doing? What is this 1 rem? What is this 1 rem doing here? What is rem? What is pixels? All those things, we are going to talk about them. As you can see now that things has changed. The way it's used to display before, there was no space, but now I'm now putting space there. This is CSS at work. With CSS, you can control the spacing around your element, remove it, or add the spacing, or do some other thing there like that. For example, here too, if I want, I can use another property here known as a border radius. I'm giving the same 1 rem again. You see that the edge of each one of the box now, it's going to curve compared to the way it is right now once the stuff is done loading on the page. As you can see now, everything is now round. Again, the text are too close to the box. So if I want, I can apply the spacing inside the box too, like that. So this is what you'll be doing with CSS. You have the way you want your element to look like. Then what do? You start applying, or you start changing different properties that you want on that element. And you can use the inline to do it if you want to be doing them one by one, or you can use embedded or the internal or the external one if you want to change different elements at the same time. As you can see now, look how our H1 is now looking like compared to what we have before. Before, without this line, there's nothing like this. But with our CSS now, using our embedded CSS, we are able to change some of the properties of this element at once. Look at all of them. I don't need to start going into each one of them one by one. With the help of our embedded CSS, we can talk to, or we can change the style of multiple elements at the same time. And how do you do that? You are going to be using what we call rule set. Like you are going to give CSS a rules to follow, to change and what to change on the element. That's just the rule set. Rule set, you have the power to talk to CSS that go to this place. Once you find this element there, then apply this so style. Just like you order something online, you put your address, and those people, they will package your stuff and they will go to the address that you drop. And if they cannot find you at that address, what do? They will return back the product. The same thing here too. So whatever you want to do here, it must be on the page. If you do something with this selector and the CSS cannot find it on the page, then it will not do anything. For example, now if I change this into H6, I don't have H6 on my screen. What I'm saying here is that CSS, go to the page, look for H6. If you can find it, then apply all this thing or change all this property on it. And as you can see, nothing is happening on my page again. This one that is up here is because of the inline that we use. And as you can see, nothing else like color red, background green, margin, whatever stuff, because we don't have the elements on the page. And that's why we need to talk about these selectors, because it's very important. It's more important than this your properties here, because that's the first thing that the CSS will check. Can I find this element on this page? Can this thing select anything on this page? If it is yes, then it will apply everything we have inside the curly brace. But if it is no, then it will just go and not do anything on the page. So nothing will happen on the page if CSS cannot find the element on the page. And if you want, you can keep going to each one of the elements and apply one by one. But that's not how to work in a real world. You don't do that, because you can have multiple elements that you want to style the same way, and you don't want to be wasting time. Just like all this li that I have on this page, they are really much. I can't be going inside each one of them to just apply same thing. That's a waste of time. What do you need? You can use this embedded here, and inside the embedded, you are going to be using declaration or you're going to be using rule set to talk to the CSS on how that selector, and what do you want to change. Those are the stuff that you now put inside the stuff. So where do you want to change where do you want to apply all this in? That's what you are going to be using selector for. And what are you changing there? Then this is what you put inside the curly brace. Everything I'm putting here, you can go inside each one of them one by one, use the inline method, and you pass everything. It will work. But the disadvantage of that is that you have to do it for each one of the elements that you want to apply the style on. So whatever element you want to apply the same style on, you have to keep going inside each one of them. And it's not advisable at all, because most of the page you want to work on, there's going to be a lot of elements that looks alike. As you can see here, this one here is like what we have here, is like what we have here. And as you can see that all of them have the same line around them. You can see that they have same line around them. So I don't want to be going inside each one of them to apply the style one by one. No, I should be able to apply it at once to all of them. So we can now use our embedded or the external CSS to do something like that. So we've talked about inline, which is to go to the element, then apply your CSS on it by using the style attributes. Or you can use this internal or embedded, which is by creating a style element. And inside that style element, you'll be creating rule set. And the rule set follow this pattern where you have this selector and you have this declaration. But what is this thing that I put here? This is what referred to as comment, because I've not talked about that before, because I'll be using it a lot as from this moment on. So this in any programming language, there's some time you want to leave some notes, or you want to have some code in your in your editor there that you don't want to see the results on the page. So you can leave a comment in HTML, you can leave comments in CSS, and you can leave comments in JavaScript. And they have different methods that you can use to create each one of them. For example, here now, assuming at the top here, I want to leave a note for myself inside the code, not to the people that I want to see the stuff on the screen. Because when you have a text here, whatever you have in your code, they are always going to be visible on the screen. So this should, for example now, this should be a comment in HTML. So, but now if I save it, you see that it's going to show on the screen. And that's not what I want. I only want this thing to show in my code, not as part of what I want to display to the user. And that's where comment comes in. And this thing is always there in any language that you want to use. Any programming language that you want to use, each one of them have a way of creating a comment, which is a way of you leaving a note for yourself or for everybody or for anybody that is going to be reading your code to know what you're actually doing on that line. Because it's kind of useful anytime you want to leave a note for yourself at a particular line that this is the reason why I'm doing this thing, or this is the reason why we are putting this in here, and so forth like that. But those text, you don't want to see it on the screen, or the user, nothing concerning about that your notes. So it's not something that's supposed to be part of the content we want on the screen. So in HTML, we can create a comment by putting the text in between this tag here. So you less than symbol, exclamation mark here, followed by this double hyphen here. And anything that is in between these two here, this is what we call comment. So moving this thing up, you see now that the color is different from what I have before. And now saving the code and going back to the screen again, you see that this text is not going to be there. It's a part of the code, but it's not going to be part of the output. So you can use comment to leave a note for yourself in the code, but those notes are not going to be visible to the user on the screen. And I'll be using this in a lot. Anywhere I don't want anything to show on the screen, I can just quickly create a comment or convert that stuff to comment, and it's not going to show on the screen. And that's what I'm doing here. But this one now is for CSS. The one we have on this line, this is how we do a comment in HTML. So it's going to be in between this stuff here and the down one here. And luckily for us, VS Code make it easier for us to create a comment. For example, this is another comment. I don't need to create that symbol myself, or I don't need to create all this thing myself. Just go to the line where you want to comment, hold down the control on your keyboard, and follow by the /. Anywhere that is / on your keyboard, hold down the control first, then press that key that have the /. As you can see, VS Code will create a comment for that text, and you will not see it, or the user will not see it on the screen there. And if I don't want the comment again, just press the same thing. It's like you are turning on and off a button. It's like a button where you turn off or on. And if it is on, the only thing you can do is to off. And if it is off, the only thing you can do is to on it. That's the same thing here. So I can turn it on and I can turn it off. So if that symbol is not there, it will be visible to the user on the screen. But once this thing is here, then it is now a comment, and going back to the screen, you will never see them on the page. But you that is reading the code, or anybody that will be reading the code, will see the text there, but it's not going to appear on the page. And that's what we call comment. And you're going to be seeing it a lot in some people's code to explain what they are doing in their code like that. But the way we create comment in HTML is not the same way we create comment in CSS. So when you want to create comment in CSS, we can use this / like this, and we have this asterisk. So anything that follows this one, so this is how to create a comment in CSS. So anything that be in between these two stuff here, they are referred to as CSS comment. So this is going to be CSS comment here. So to create a CSS comment, you start with the slash followed by asterisk. Then to close or to stop the comment, you reverse what you have at the top here. So slash asterisk, then to close it, asterisk slash. But whatever that is now in between the stuff, that's your comment. Another comment again. It's the comment. As long as you are in between the stuff, the comments, and so forth like that. So this is how to create comment in CSS. And I will be using it a lot. As you can see, I don't want this thing to appear, or I don't want this thing to do anything, because it's not making sense. It's just a way for me to explain what is going on this line. As you can see, it's complaining already, because what I'm doing here is not valid. This is not how to do it, but it's just for me to explain what is rule set. So and I don't want to delete it. What did I do? I commented it out here. So I commented out the code, and now it will be here, but on the screen the user are not going to see it, but inside the code is still there. So I'll be using this comment a lot because there's some stuff I will be typing. I don't want to delete them, so that you can have them as a reference later on there like that. So I won't be deleting anything. I will just be commenting them out, and anytime we need to revert to them, we just quickly scroll up and we can bring it back and use it again. But anytime I don't need anything and I've already typed it before, I will convert it to a comment. And this is how you create a comment in CSS. And for the HTML, this is how you create a comment. Whatever that is in between these two stuff here, they are referred to as HTML comment. And for this one, they are referred to as CSS comment like that. So we are introducing ourselves to CSS, which is the language that you can use to style the elements that you have on the page. And we have different methods of including CSS on the page. We've talked about the inline method, which is by going to the element and you give it this attribute style. Then inside the code, you supply all the properties that you want to change on the element. So here we are changing two properties, the color and the background. So the color is red, which is what is showing on the screen, and the background is green, which is what is showing on the screen. But the disadvantage of this inline is that it only works on the element where you have the attribute. If you have the same element or you want to apply the same style on different elements, you have to do copy and paste to each one of them, which is not advisable there, because you can have same element multiple times, like 10, 20, depending on the number of times you use that element, and you want to apply same style on all of them. You can't be using this inline. It's not advisable at all. So we can use this internal or this external method, because whatever you're going to be doing inside this internal is still what you are going to be doing inside external. And how do you create internal CSS? To create internal CSS, what you do is to create style elements. Now here, when you're dealing with inline, it is attributes to a particular element. But when you're dealing with embedded or the internal one, it's going to be element on its own. And we normally put it inside the head tag. You can put it anywhere you want on the page, but by convention, we normally put it inside the head tag. So you only see all CSS place inside the head tag before the closing head tag, you are always going to see there. And inside the style element, what are you going to be doing there? You are going to be applying what we call rule sets, which is set of rules that you are going to give to CSS on or where to apply the style and what do you want to change on the element. So where do you want to apply the style, and at the same time, what are the style do you want to change? So where to apply it, you are going to be using selector, and what do you want to apply there, you are going to be using declaration. And as you can see from here on line 18 to 24, this is rule set here. We created this rule set, and what is the rule here, or what is the selector here? We have this H6. So on the page, we are talking to CSS that go to anywhere that is H6 inside the body, then apply all these rules or apply all this style to that element. And once I save here now, you see that it will look for H6 on the screen. But we don't have anything like H6. As you can see, nothing is happening. So this selector here is very important because that's the first thing CSS will look for before applying your style. So if I change it to li now, you see that this thing will go to the page and it can find all our li, then it will apply the style on all of them, not just the first one or the second one. Even though later on you can give CSS the selector to only pick the first one, or to pick the second one, or to pick only the third one, and so forth like that. When we get to selector, we talked about some of them, but for now, this is all about rule sets inside the embedded CSS, which allows us to apply CSS directly to different elements at once, instead of us going to each one of them one by one. And again too, I talked about comment, which is a way of leaving notes for yourself in the code. So anytime you have a comment in your code, the browser is going to ignore whatever that is there. And as you can see, nothing is happening again. So the browser will ignore anything that it sees as a comment. It will not interpret them. It will just leave the stuff as part of the code. It will not put it on the page at all. So anything you don't want to show on the page and you still want to have it in your code, just convert it to a comment. So anytime the browser gets to that line, it will ignore it and it will continue with the other stuff that you have in your code. Because what the browser is doing is that it's interpreting everything line by line. Just like you read a book. You go to line 1, you read line 1. When you are done with line 1, you read line 2 and so forth like that. That's the same thing browser will do. It will be reading all this in line by line. And when you get to the line where you have the comment, it will just ignore them. It will skip it and continue with the other stuff you have on the page. And that's the reason why they are not showing. Because anywhere browser sees the comment, it will ignore whatever that is there like that. But now, I don't really use inline or this embedded method because most of the time, I always want to separate my CSS from the HTML. Look at it now. If you put all of them together in one file, it will work. But later on, when you are dealing with CSS, there's a lot of things you have to type on multiple lines. As you can see here, that we are putting all our properties on multiple lines like this. But some element you want to change their properties, you are going to type a lot of things, or you are going to select multiple elements. And this thing can take a lot of space inside our HTML file. So instead of us putting them together, we can put our CSS in its own separate file or put it anywhere we want, and we now connect it to the HTML file. And that's where the external comes in. For example here, look at my file explorer. As you can see here, I have this file, which is this style.css. So this is what we call external CSS here. So your external CSS is just a separate file that holds all your CSS declaration or rule sets. That's what you'll be doing inside your external CSS. What you'll be doing there is just rule sets. So you'll be putting all the rules sets that you want to use to control the content or the elements that you have on the screen. You don't need to create the style. We already know that this is a CSS file. So the team will understand that this is a CSS file, and that's why we have the extension there, which is .css. You don't need to be using, because what you'll be doing here is not HTML again. What you'll be doing there is all about CSS. And the major thing you are going to be doing here is just the rule set. That's what you'll be doing here. Rule set. And what is rule set? Don't forget, rule set is just the combination of a selector and the declaration that you want to apply. So where do you want to apply all this in? That's selector. And what are the things you are applying there? That's the declaration. And that's what you'll be doing here. You'll be doing a lot of them. So you'll be selecting different elements and you'll be applying whatever you want to change on them and so forth like that. This is what you'll be doing inside CSS file. For example, here now, I want to select my H1 on the page. I want to change the color to blue. I want to change the background to orange like this. Then after this one, I want to change the size of the text. So I want to change the size. All these things we talked about them when we get to the property. But for now, I just want to change the size. I want the thing to be bigger than the way it is before. And again, as you can see, this is one rule set like this. I'm done with this rule set. I want to create another rule set for another element. For example, here, I want to select all my H2. So I'm creating a rule set for H1, and here too, I'm creating another rule set for H2, and so forth like that. That's what you'll be doing inside the CSS file. You create a rule set, and the rule set will target the element and along with whatever stuff you want to change on that element. So for this one, all the H2, they are going to have the color of green like that. So the background here is going to be black. And at the same time, for all this one, the font size like this is going to be 2 rem. So this is what I want. This is the rules that I'm giving to CSS to apply on my elements on the page. So CSS, go to anywhere we have H1 on the screen, change the color to blue, background to orange, and the font size to 3 rem. What is 3 rem? When we get to the other parts that I explain them, I will talk to you about it. But for now, forget about what I'm typing here. When we get to the part we focus on them, you know what is rem or what is this 3 rem is doing there. But for now, just know that something will change on the page. So here too, I have H2. I'm giving these rules set by talking to CSS. Select all the H2 on the screen, change the color to green, the background to black, and the font size to 2 rem. So let me save the code. But after saving the code, we are not seeing anything on the screen. So HTML file and the CSS file that we have together, they don't know about each other. Don't forget, this is external file. So we need to connect the CSS file to the HTML file before we can see changes. This HTML file doesn't know anything that is going on with this CSS file. So it doesn't know about all these things that we're doing here. So we need to talk to this HTML that go to this CSS file and all the CSS that is here, then use it for this particular page. And how do you do that? Just like the way we are creating style for our embedded, the same thing here too, we can link to external CSS by using this link tag. So if you look at it, link can be used for different stuff, but the one I need it for right now is the CSS. So as you can see, it can be used for different stuff. But once you just press enter on the screen, on the stuff, it will assume you are dealing with CSS. And as you can see here, it have style sheets. Don't forget, CSS is just cascade style sheet. So here, this link here, to use it to connect to external CSS, you are going to have a rel of style sheet, and inside the href, by now you know what is href. This is where you connect the two files together. Just like the way you connect two pages together, this is where you connect two files together, or the CSS that we want to use. So inside this href, this is where you pass the link of the page or the link of the CSS file that you want to connect to. And what is the name of the CSS? This is just the style.css that we have here. And the reason why it's like that is because they are inside the same folder. They are inside the same folder. That's why I just type the name along with the extension. But if they are not inside the same folder, which you are going to see later on when we are talking about different other methods of linking files together, I'm going to bring all those one in. But for now, the two files, they are inside this CSS folder. So just mention the name of the file along with the extension of the file. And what we are doing on this line 26 is connecting this, our style.css, to this index.html. And what the browser will do is that it will go to this file and it will pick all the CSS that is there and create this style for us, and then put all the declaration we have here inside that style. So you are not the one that will be creating the style. The browser will handle that for you, but it will go into this file and it will take all the declarations that all the rule sets that you have there. And once the browser sees the stuff that is correct, you say that it will apply the CSS on our page instantly once the page is done loading, as you can see now. So can you see what is going on? So all the H1 on the screen, what am I doing there? Like that. They forget about this first one because it will not apply it. Some stuff will not change it. And I'm going to be talking about that later on. But let me move it down. It's not the major stuff right now. So I'm going to move it down. I'm going to move it down here. So let me just put it CSS precedence like this. So it's going to be down here, but it's not the major thing. Let me forget about it for now. But it will come in handy later on, because in order for you not to scratch your head, as you can see, this one did not use background of orange. Why is it not using orange? Why is it using green? When I get to CSS selector and I'm talking about specificity and precedence, I will bring it in at that time. But for now, what we have here is that we are connecting to our external CSS by using this link. It have a rel which is talking to the browser, the type of the file you are connecting to. So we are connecting to CSS. And based on this, the browser knows how to generate some stuff for us behind the scene that will make sure that the stuff that we are getting from this file is all about CSS. And as you can see on the screen, everything is being applied here, which is coming from our external CSS. So this one allows us to connect to external CSS there, and the file can be something you have in your project or is coming from online, just like the image that you can connect to the local one or you can connect to the online one. So the same thing here too. You can have the CSS in your project or it's something that is coming from another site entirely. Once you have the link, just pass it into the href of this link tag and it's going to connect to that page or to that site or whatever that stuff is. Download the CSS that is here and it will use it on the page based on the content you have here. So whatever you be doing here must match what is on the page, because if you are doing any selector here that did not match anything on the page, it will not work, because CSS will look at whatever you want to change. So do you want to change something on the P? Do you want to change on the H1? Do you want to change on the other element and so forth like that? That's what the CSS will look for. And once you find the element or the selector there, or the element that matches that selector, then it will apply all your properties. And as you can see on this screen here, I have this, all my H1 having the color of blue, then the background of this orange, and again to all the H2, as you can see, it's applying a separate stuff to them. So we give CSS a rules to follow there. And what will you be doing in the rule set? You give it the element or the selector, what you are going to, the CSS is going to use to look for the element, and at the same time what you want to change on that element. So here H1, I'm talking to CSS, look for all the H1, then apply all this property on it. Again here, look for all the H2 and apply this property on the H2. And as you can see, no other element is going to change because we're giving it a rules and it's going to follow that rules. Not that oh, you did not start this H1, let me help you to start it. No, whatever rules that you gave, that's what is going to follow. And if that rule inside the rule set, if you cannot find that selector on the page, then it will just abandon the page, or it will just go and do nothing. And that's the reason why in the next class we are going to be focusing on this part, which is these selectors here. So we have different selectors that you can use to target elements on the screen based on what you want to do. So we have something called the element selector, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm targeting different elements with their name. But apart from targeting them with their name, you can target them based on the class selector. You can target them based on this attribute ID. You can target them based on the attribute class. You can do something known as child selector. You can do something known as attribute selector, and a lot of them. But don't forget, here we're only focusing on the basic stuff, because we want to have all this basic knowledge first. Then later on, when we are actually working on the site, anywhere we need to go advanced there, then they will keep coming in. But not now that we just keep talking about all the selectors. There's a lot of selectors we can talk about. but we only need the major one that we need to start building something later on. And when we get to the time we need all the advanced selector, then I will be bringing them in, and at that time it won't look that scary there like that. So we need to talk about the simple one, like the element selector, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm selecting the element h1, I'm selecting the element h2, and so forth like that. Class selector, this one allows you to select your element based on the class. I will explain that one too in the next class, because different element, we have this attribute that you can apply there known as class. So you can give different element classes here, and based on the class or the value that you are giving to this element on this class, you can target this h1. So instead of using the name, you can use the value of the class to pick that element from the selector there. Again, you can give this id, or you can target by id. This is another attribute too. Now I told you I will be bringing some attribute in later on. This is another attribute that you see a lot, and this one is quite different from class. Just like the way you know it, id is something that's used to be unique. So for each element, whatever id you are giving have to be different. So if you give this one as list, any other element on this page must not have the same id list again. It can be id something else, but it will not be id list. But when you're talking about class, just like this class now, or just like school, multiple people can be, or multiple students can be inside a single class. So which means here too, multiple elements can have the same class. So if I give this h1 class heading, I can actually give another element that same class. So you can give another element. It doesn't need to be h1. It can be any other element. But multiple classes here, or multiple elements, can belong or have same class. And at the same time too, you can have grades, or you can have multiple classes on one element. So just like the way you can apply this in different places, your class, you can actually have class 1 like this. So for example, this is class 1, or I can have class list, class orange. These are classes, so not styling. So I can have upper and so forth like that. So this single element now is having these 3 classes, and based on these classes now, I can style it from my CSS, and that's where this class selector will come to later on. But when you're talking about id is something that is unique for each element. You can give them a name too. You can give any element a name that you want, but that name should be unique. So since this one is using id list, no other element on the screen should be using id list again. This is wrong, like this is wrong, but this is right, because now they are not the same. This one is list 1, but this one is list. So when you're dealing with id, it should always be different for each element. But when you're talking about class, it doesn't care. Class doesn't care, because multiple elements can belong to a single class, and we're going to be using this class a lot later on, because most of the elements you have on a page, they are not the same thing. Like you have h1, you have ol, you have other elements, but you want to apply same style on them. So you can give them same class, and you now target them, or you style them based on that class. And again too, one element can have multiple classes separated by space. So this is one class, this is another class, and this is another class. So which means this ol now is having class list, is having class orange, and is having class upper. And these same classes that we have on this ol can be used on another element later on, or anywhere, because it doesn't care. Class is not unique. It's not for one element. It can be used on multiple elements. The same name can be used on multiple elements. But what is there is that whatever style I apply for this upper, it will work on this ol, and at the same time it will work on this h1. That's the advantage of class. It allows us to style separate element or same element based on that class easily. For example, now going to this site, you see that there is a lot of things that looks alike. There's a lot of things that looks alike. So instead of you targeting those elements one by one, or applying the same thing on different line, you can select all of them at once by giving them a class. And that class now, based on that class, as you can see here, what we have here is the same thing here, is the same thing here, but the content are different. So I can just create this container. How do you create container? I will explain it later on. because it's part of this class too. I've already, as you can see, grouping in HTML. So we're going to be talking about it in the next class, which is what they are using here. As you can see, they are putting multiple elements together, and it now looks like one element. This is not one element here. They are being grouped as one, and later on, you'll be able to style them as if it is just one element. In the next class, I'll be explaining what is grouping and some of the elements you can use to group other elements together. Most especially this div here. You always see it a lot on different sites for grouping. But major thing here is that classes are very important or are very useful anytime you have different elements that you want to apply same style on them, and they are not technically from the same tag. So you can have H1, you can have P, but you want them to have the same style. So you can give them same class, and based on that class, you style them directly from CSS. But there are some elements that you need to group them together to be able to achieve what you want to do, which is like what is going on here. Look at this thing now. It looks like a box, and inside that box, you have all this icon at the top. You have the image there. You have this one here, and you have all this text here. But they are being grouped together. It looks like they are one stuff. It's not one item here. There are multiple elements come together as a group. But how do you group them? That's where all this div, header, and so forth like that that we're going to be using in the next class here. Even though here these people are using swiper slide, which is like what they use to do this sliding stuff. But when we get to the advanced stuff, you are going to see how to do the sliding. As you can see, the stuff can scroll from left to right and so forth like that. But that is not the major thing right now. The major thing is for us to be able to group different elements together and style them. As you can see, you are going to be grouping elements together there, because the way you want your element to look like, you want them to act like one, like they are one. Just like Nigeria, we are one. You have another country, that's another one, and so forth like that. So here we can have this grouping element. They don't really create any styling for you by default. You'll be the one that will use the CSS, but they are there to group different elements together. And the one we have here is this div. We have this section, header, the nav, the footer, and a lot of them like that I will be using as from next class to group different stuff together so that I can focus on that group alone without affecting what is on the page. So that I want to do some styling, it will only affect that group. It will not affect any other thing on the screen. Even though here we have some other groups already, like this OH now, as you can see, it's like a group for all this LI. But what if you have this H? What if you want to group this H1 and the entire stuff here together? That's where all this one will come in, because they are not just like they are grouping one element. You can use it to group different elements that are not even related to each other, but they need to come together as one. So you can use like this div, section, header, nav, and so forth like that to group them. And this thing is being used a lot on different sites there, which I'm going to showcase them to you much there in the next class. As you can see here, you see the same div. Can you see here the header, which is what I put here? So header is really useful when you want to group the content that you put at the top of your site together. That's where we normally use header like that. And all the one that you group at the bottom of the site like this, we normally use footer to group them. So they are known as semantic tag. So if this, can you see here too? The site is using it. So we use it to group. Can you see that is the one that is grouping all the content together? And that's the one that have this background. And since all of them they are inside this group, it will apply the same style to all of them. Not that you have to be doing it to each one of the elements one by one. So you always group your elements together based on the area that you are placing them or what you want to achieve there. The same thing here too. As you can see, this is group here. So we have a group here. Let me bring in my. So if you look at it, we have this group here. Where's my box? So this is one group, and here you are going to be using all these grouping elements to put them together so that whatever you are doing here, it will only affect this group. It will not affect any other thing on the screen. And as you can see here too, this is another group on its own there like that. So this is what you'll be doing. You put elements together or you group them together and you style them using your CSS. But how do you style them? You can use your inline CSS or you can use your embedded or external. And when you're talking about the inline, just go to the element and give it the attribute style. But that one is not useful anytime you have a lot of elements that need to apply the same style on all of them. If you look at it now, the way the header looks like here is the same thing as how you are going to see the other one too looks like. The same way, the way all the paragraphs look like here is the same way the other paragraphs too look like. But you don't want to be applying the style one by one to all of them. You can change the styling on this or the P on the page at once. Not that you have to start going inside each one of the P that you use, or inside each one of the H that you use, or inside each one of the image. As you can see, all the image, they have the edge there that is curved, which is the border radius that I used that time. See, there is the same thing here too. It's the same here, it's the same here. So most of the time, you want to apply the same style to your element. And what do? You can use the embedded or external by using the rule set to target all of them at once, instead of you going to each one of them one by one like that. So it makes it easier for us to style our element or to apply style to different elements instantly like that. So this is all I have for today. So from next class now, we are going to start with our selectors, talking about the element selector in details, the class selector in details. I just briefly explain them, but in the next class we are going to talk about them in details, how you can represent them, because everything in CSS or everything with HTML and CSS is just pattern. Everything follow the same pattern. The difference is the text that you are typing there like that. So how do you do class selector? How do you do element selector? How do you do ID selector? How do you do child selector? How do you do attribute selector? Those are the stuff we are going to be talking about in the next class. And at the same time, I forgot to add something here before the property, because they are very important too. And what I forget to mention here is the CSS unit, and that's where you are going to know what is that one rem that I used that time. So CSS units like this, and under this unit we have two types. We have absolute and we have the relative, and as you can see them, we have like pixels, the percentage, the rem that I'm using. So that's what I'm going to explain it. There's another one to em, but we don't need this one right now, so we don't need it. Again, there's some other one too that I need to talk about, which is vh. So we have the vw, because they are very important. We are going to be using them later on. These are the major one that you always use, but we have like hundreds of units in CSS, but these are the major one that you always use, or any site you go to, these are the major one you are going to see them using too like that. You won't see them using more than this, except if they want to do some crazy stuff. That's when you'll be seeing them using other selector like that. And I can see what this thing is using by just coming to the CSS part of their code there. So going to any of the elements that I want, I can see what they are doing there with the properties. So I will be showing you this one in the next class like that. So because this thing is very important, you need to know how to use this developer tools, because this is what you'll be using to know what the browser is doing behind the scene there. So let me expand this. Let me click on this A, and you see that they are using some of these using. Can you see what they are using there is rem? So what is rem? When do you use it? Where you are not going to be using it? When do you use pixels? And so forth like that. So we're going to talk about them under this CSS unit. These are the major one that you have, but the stuff is divided into two parts. We have absolute and we have relative units. So this is one of the absolute, while all this one they are relative. What is that? When we get to that part, I will explain all of them. So